Dandaut Bandhan Anakvar Sarvakala Samrathe Dolan Tera Ko Prabhu Nanak De Kar Hathe Firit Prabh Aya Paraya To Sarnaye Nanak Ki Prabh Binati Apni Bhagati Hilaye नानक की प्रभ बेनती अपनी भगति लाए। वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह। Sad Sangat ji, with Guru Sahib's bakshish and Guru Sahib's kirpa, we're now on the fifth part of this series and the final part of this series in remembering the first week of June 1984 and the genocide, the attack that took place at Sri Harimandir Sahib in Amritsar Sahib. So just to have a quick recap on what we've looked at what we looked at yesterday over the events of the 5th and 6th of June, is that the majority of people had become shaheed. The resistance, the Sikh resistance and the Khalsa that were defending Sri Harimandir Sahib, by the 6th of June at around 10 a.m., the Indian army had occupied most parts of the complex. We hear from the eyewitness accounts of Gyani Gurpal Singh that the tanks had entered and started attacking many parts of the complex, in particular Sri Akal Takht Sahib, with fires breaking out on the 3rd floor, and then after enforced artillery, the majority of the face front of Akal Takht being absolutely destroyed, and with reports of up to 80 shellings upon Sri Akal Takht Sahib. At the same time, the 6th of June, we hear reports of between 40 to 70 other Gurdwara simultaneously attacked in Sri Amritsar Sahib, in Punjab, And following this last day of battle, we see the organized looting and the attack on our history beginning. So over the course of June the 7th and June the 8th, we see garbage trucks start to enter the complex of Sri Harimandir Sahib in order to clear up and hide the atrocities that have taken place over the past week. And bodies are piled up in these garbage trucks, taken away in order to do the sanskar, in order to be cremated. And eyewitness accounts write, and reports on this matter write, that there were so many bodies, it was impossible to do one funeral pyre, one fire in that sense per body, and that there were 25 to 30 bodies piled up on one funeral pyre altogether because of the lack of wood and the sheer amount of bodies that the government were trying to dispose of. In addition, we hear that on the 7th and 8th in particular, the looting of Sri Harimandir Sahib and the complex in its entirety begins. And the army starts looting the Toshakhana, which we mentioned 2 days previously, which is basically the treasury of Sri Harimandir Sahib, in which the majority of the prized possessions of the Panth, historical documents, and also sarups of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj are kept. And the Sikh reference library, which is still at Sri Harimandir Sahib today, which has since been repaired, was put on fire. Now, one of the most heartbreaking points in this fire is the Beadbi of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji that occurred. And at that point, there were around 2,500 historical Puratan, old sarups of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Now, setting fire to that Sikh reference library meant that many of these sarups were also destroyed. And out of those 2,500 sarups of Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, only around 175 survived. Now, to put this into context, Sad Sangat Ji, Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj is our Guru. Many of us last week were remembering the Shahidi, the martyrdom of Guru Arjan Dev Ji Maharaj, and hearing of the stories of the torture that they were put through was heart-wrenching, and rightly so. But now imagining this sort of scale is seriously painful for any Gursikh and is a direct blow at the heart of any Sikh. Just over 2,000 sarups simultaneously burnt of Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj is something that brings a lot of emotion, a lot of pain for all of us, and something that should not be let off lightly. In addition, if we look at from a historical point of view, these sarups there was no limit on the value that these contained, because these are sarups that cannot be replaced. They can simply not be printed again. They were handwritten, and many of them had a historical background and a story behind them. So from the Sikh reference library, in addition to other historical grunts, historical writings, historical accounts, letters, hukamname, all those kind of things, all of which are destroyed due to the acts, due to the purposeful burning of our history. In addition, there are 103 historical paintings that are damaged, rare items are stolen, and over 20,000 rare historical documents are looted. One item in particular that was seen taken was the canopy, a shattar from the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And this canopy was actually given to Maharaja Ranjit Singh from the Nazim at the time, who was the ruler of Hyderabad, a state in India. And it was studded with many diamonds, many other precious pearls and stones. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh Ji resultantly donated it to Sri Harimandir Sahib. So items such as this that can't have a price put on them in terms of what they mean to the Panth and also in terms of monetary value, were all robbed and looted by the Indian army. And at this point, I just want to bring up our focus back to one of the first talks that we looked at, one of the first discussions we had on this, which was that the Indian army entered to wipe out these militants. Now, by the 7th and 8th of June, that job had more or less been done. There was hardly any retaliation from Sikh resistance fighters. Only a handful, only a flicker of Sikh resistance fighters were remaining at that point, none of which were in the Sikh reference library and none of which were in the treasury at the time. So it begs the question, why on earth did the army feel the need to first of all loot from a religious place, loot the donations of the Sangat, because Golaks were also emptied at the time, and secondly, why on earth would the army feel the need to set alight to the Sikh reference library in particular? Now, the conclusion, Sadhguru, is very straightforward, it's very clear. As we've looked at, and as many of the non-Sikhs have reported, the reason for this attack was not to just wipe out a particular person or group of people. It was a direct hit at the Sikh faith, in particular their history and also their philosophy. Now, when a group of people lose their history, that's generally when we start to see their decline. If you look at the history of races that have been wiped off or religions that have been wiped off the face of this earth, the first thing that goes is their history. Now, when you lose connection to your history, you lose connection to the religion itself, because history acts as a certain evidence or a testing base for that religion, and also draws inspiration to the people following that religion. So by the deliberate attack on our religion, there was an attempt to disconnect us from Sikhi and also the inspiration that many hundreds of years of our history provides. So on the 9th and the 10th of June, we see a similar setup in Sri Harimandir Sahib, where the continuous looting occurs and also the army is constantly getting rid of bodies and covering up the atrocities that have occurred. Now, at this point, news is spread all across India, and in particular in Delhi, where there was quite a few Sikhs living at the time. Protests and riots start out of resentment, out of anger due to the attack that's taken place. And the Indian government issues orders for army personnel, for police, and also government officials to shoot on sight in order to disperse these crowds. And many attain Shahidi whilst protesting. So over the 9th and 10th of June, the last fighters, the resistance to the Indian army at that point, those defending Sri Akal and the complex of Sri Harimandir Sahib attain Shahidi. And by the 10th of June, the complex is fully under Indian occupation. The keys are taken, and the keys are actually only returned to Sri Harimandir Sahib, to the Sikh Panth, on the 1st of October, a few months later. And this was only due to the constant protest that the Sikhs took part in against the Indian army. Now, just like us to focus on one particular shaheed in the dying days of this battle, and one of the last recorded shaheeds, who goes by the name of Bhai Mandeep Singh Naguke. Bhai Sahib was very instrumental throughout the years leading up into 1984 and was a very close associate of Sant Jarnail Singh. So the first part, or the first recorded part of Bhai Sahib getting involved in the freedom movement was shortly after 1978. Now, if we take our minds back to 1978, in April was when that procession, that false procession led by Guru Bachana, the leader of the Nirankari cult at the time, mocking the Amrit Sanchar ceremony and also mocking Vaisakhi, took place, in which 13 Singhs from the Akhand Kirtani Jatha and also Damdami Taksal were shaheed. After that, the Panth took a response and realized that this man, Guru Bachana, who had instigated and led all this, proclaiming himself as a guru of the Panth, he needs to be served with justice and he needs to be killed. And there were around a dozen Sikhs, including Bhai Mandeep Singh Naguke, who actually went to Delhi and took vengeance and took justice by killing Guru Bachana at his residence shortly after that atrocity, shortly after that attack on Sikh values took place in 1978. So the first part we hear of Bhai Mandeep Singh was in the killing and the bringing of justice to Guru Bachana, the leader of the Nirankari cult. Another poignant part of his life was in 1983 on the 25th of April. So just over a year, before June 1984. And tensions have started being aggravated. There's a lot of propaganda about Sant Jarnail Singh, and the government are also very scared about the defense that the Singhs and Singhania are starting to prepare because of the information being leaked that an attack at Sri Harimandir Sahib is imminent. So what happens is a few undercover police men are sent into Sri Harimandir Sahib in order to try and take out and try to kill Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. And the Singhs and Singhania hear word of this, and one of the people that actually take action and stop this happening is Bhai Mandeep Singh Naguke. And just by the area where we normally drop our shoes off at Sri Harimandir Sahib, 3 or 4 police officers led by DIG Atwal were waiting for Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and picking their moment in order to try and shoot Sant Jarnail Singh. After realizing that these are undercover hitmen, in essence, Bhai Mandeep Singh Ji shoots DIG Atwal whilst he's putting his shoes on. The other undercover policemen, see this and run for their lives, absolutely terrified of seeing the Singhs open fire and kill one of their men. After this, there was no one dared to try and come undercover within Sri Harimandir Sahib and to try and take out any of the Singhs, in particular Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, ever again in that form, due to the sheer fear that the Singhs, such as Bhai Mandeep Singh Ji Naguke, instilled within the government and within the Punjab police at that time. And we hear on the 9th of June, he was one of the last shaheeds that kept fighting throughout those 9 days, having been located in Ramguriya Bunga and attaining their shahidi on the 9th of June. So 2 other shaheeds I'd like to mention, in particular Bibiyan, because in this time frame of June 1984, it can seem as if the narrative is heavily focused on Singhs, but it's also very important to mention the Bibiyan that were at the forefront and also behind closed doors doing immense seva. And 2 in particular I'd like to mention as we wrap up this series is firstly Bibi Upkar Kaur, who was the leader of the women's wing of the All India Sikh Students Federation. We mentioned a few days ago that the men's leader was the name's gone from my head now, the son of Sant Kartar Singh Ji. Sorry, the name's gone out of my head. But Bibi Upkar Kaur, the president of the women's wing of All India Sikh Students Federation, she was also fighting in Akal Takht, and it's said that she attained Shahidi on the 6th or 7th of June, and she was actually not taking ammunition, but herself with a gun in her hand, fending off the Indian army and protecting Sri Harimandir Sahib. And the last Bibi I'd like to mention at this point is Bibi Paramjit Kaur. Now, Bibi Paramjit Kaur was famous for actually staying in the complex of Sri Harimandir Sahib, so the actually Gurdwara itself, the golden temple part, if you like. And she was there protecting the Sarup of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji and standing bodyguard so that no pain, no damage would be inflicted on the Swaroop of Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji. And she also attained Shahidi throughout that week. Now, Bibi Paramjit Kaur is also known as the sister of Bibi Amarjit Kaur, who was the wife of Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, who we talked about recently as well. So she stood guard to Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj and was shot resultantly, with her last breaths giving everything for the Panth and also for her Guru in protection of her Guru. So that wraps up the timeline, if you like, of what happened from the 1st to the 10th of June in Sri Harimandir Sahib in the complex within Amritsar Sahib. Now I was going to spend a few minutes recapping on what we've taken, what this means for us in today's world, and also other events that are relevant to June 1984. So we looked at the narratives that initially were pumped out by the Indian propaganda machine, that there was this separatist movement that had been started right from 1947, where Sikhs wanted their own country, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Many sources, in particular non-Sikhs, also acclaimed this, that Sikhs were simply fighting for their own rights. And in terms of Punjab and the Anandpur Sahib resolution, and resultantly the Dharam Yudh Morcha, Sikhs were fighting for the state of Punjab and equal rights comparatively to the other states of India at the time. And after looking at all the sources and also the personal accounts of people that were there at the time, there's no doubt in any of our minds that this most definitely was a genocide, and it wasn't a movement to suppress this nationalist or this terrorist organization, rather to try and strike the hearts of the Sikhs so that they never ever dare to shout out, to bark at the Indian government again. Following this was not an isolated event. This triggered a chain of events which led to the genocide that took place from 1984 up until as late as 1995. So a span of 10 to 11 years, in which we saw the constant onslaught of Sikhs, not only in Punjab but across India. So on the 31st of October, we see the assassination of Indira Gandhi by her 2 Sikh bodyguards, and resultantly on the 1st of November and after that, the anti-Sikh the anti-Sikh genocide that took place in Delhi in November, in which thousands of Sikhs were killed in Delhi after deliberate planning on behalf of the Delhi government. We also see other operations in which Harmandir Sahib is attacked, Operation Black Thunder and also Operation Woodrose. And one of the most heart-wrenching, one of the most disgusting operations that is quite hard to talk about in all honesty is the operation called Shuddhi Karan. Now, Shuddhi means to purify, Karan means to do. So this is the operation that the Punjab government labelled as purifying the Sikhs. Now, what does this mean? This was a systematic approach in order to try and wipe out generations of Sikhs that were coming. And by Shuddhi Karan, they meant trying to purify the bloodline of the Sikhs by diluting it and by making them into Hindus. So what we see is police officers openly raping as many women as possible, and in the hope that their offspring are no longer a pure bloodline of Sikhi. And we see the systematic rape, abuse, and torture of not only women but young women, children, and obviously men. So these are all things that we won't be discussing right now, but things for yourselves at home to do further research upon. So I'll mention them again: Operation Black Thunder, Operation Shuddhi Karan, Operation Woodrose. And although that kind of time has passed, it's important to mention the current struggles that Punjabis are still facing. The water struggle, the electricity struggle, the attack on farmers and their yield prices, the circle of debt that many farmers are currently in due to the forcible use of pesticides in which the government is making them use. All of this stuff, there's a lot of research on it, and I implore you all to go and look at these things in a lot more depth, because the battle now continues behind closed doors. The battle now continues without the need of firepower or artillery. So over this week, you would have seen the hashtag Never Forget 1984. And the part of never forgetting is very important, because there will be many people from our own Panth, from our own community, and most in particular outside the community, saying you should forget this. What happened was bad, but now it's time to move on. Now, just to take it away from a Sikh perspective for a second, Imagine telling a Jewish person to forget Adolf Hitler. Imagine telling a Jewish person to forget the 6 million Jews that were made and persecuted and killed due to the regimes of Germany at that time. That is ridiculously offensive and also just inhuman, because from our history we draw strength. From our history we take the lessons of our history and use those lessons to try and prevent it happening again. So in the terms of June 1984, nothing is different. And also the events following June 1984, nothing is different for us. It's something that should never be suppressed, something that should never be forgotten, just as the rest of our history has never been forgotten. We don't forget the Vardaka Lugara or the Shotaka Lugara, in which two of the genocides took place in the 1800s, in the 1700s, sorry. And rightly so, because it's because of those sacrifices that we are living here today. And in essence, because of those shaheeds, we are breathing, we are wearing the stars on our heads. And it's something that we should respect, draw inspiration from, and also give thanks to. And these parts of our history also show us how to react to attacks on the Panth. And every attack has also faced resistance from the Sikhs. Now, if we forget the truth of the matter, if we forget about 1984, in the future, and most definitely there will be problems, there will be obstacles in the future, we might take other approaches. We might sit and let people attack us. We might take up the path of being pacifists and saying that, oh, we don't fight back in Sikhi. If we have nothing to judge these things against, then Sad Sangat Ji will be left with our own devices, and that could be quite disastrous. And one thing that this history teaches me is that we are truly on our own as a Panth. And Guru Sahib has told us that as well, from the realms of Anantapur Sahib in the 1703, 1704, when all these fake oaths from the Mughals, from the Pathans, from the Muslims at the time and the Hindus at the time, the Hil Raje, in that point, we realize that no matter how many people may try and give an arm out to the Sikh Panth, our history has shown many and many a times that we are truly on our own. And there's nothing wrong with that. Personally, I feel that the quicker we realize that, the quicker and the better off we'll be. And Guru Sahib in Sarablo Dibani talks about what a Khalsa is meant to do. And Guru Sahib says that Jab lag Khalsa rahe niyara, tab lag tej diun mein sara. Jab eh gaye be paran ki reet, main na karu inki prateet. That as long as the Khalsa and my Sikhs stay close to what I have set out for this, as long as the Khalsa stays close to my teachings, that I will bestow upon them all the power they could possibly need within this world. And our history has shown us that in the depths of the darkest times in our Panth, we have grown to create kingdoms, whether that's the time of Nawab Kapoor Singh in 1733 and creating the missiles and creating an autonomy in Punjab for Sikhs, whether that's the time of Banda Singh Bahadur, who destroyed Sirhind and also gave rights back to the people of Punjab, or whether that's the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh creating one of the greatest empires Asia has ever seen. These attacks come very regular in Sikhi. If you trace your times back to the time of Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, we see the battles commencing around the 1700s, and then the 1730s, 1740s, another wave genocide starts again. Then in the 1780s, and then leading to time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh in the 1800s. And then we see the times of the British and the Anglo-Sikh Wars in 1840, 1850s. So every 30, 40, 50 years, this cycle of onslaught continues. And there's a great Gursikh known as the name of Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, who was one of the shaheeds at the time of Sri Amritsar Sahib in 1978. And his book, Qurbani, is something that I would highly recommend all of you check out. It can be purchased from the Akhand Kirtan Ijatha website. And it's a short biography on him in which he states and he talks about this current onslaught that Sikhs have been at the brunt of. And he says that the 10th Guru formed the Khalsa by shedding his own blood and the blood of his family. When this plant of the Panth gets dried up, it needs more blood. Then the Guru's beloved ones spill their blood to keep the Khalsa's flag flying. This cycle comes approximately every 50 years. So it's not to think that what's happened in the past has happened and we won't have to face it again. Our history has shown that these things will keep continuing. and also should highlight to us that now in these times of peace, we should truly try to instill that sense of being tiyar par tiyar, being forever ready for whatever comes, and start preparing ourselves for any events that might come upon us or other people of this world in which we can defend them. So how do we do that? First of all, by physically and spiritually getting ourselves ready. Spiritually in the sense of making sure we're doing seva on a regular basis. Times are quite difficult now in quarantine, but hopefully it'll give you a bit of time to reflect and also plan what changes am I going to make when the gurdwaras reopen, or when seva initiatives recontinue, or what could I possibly do now in quarantine to do my bit for the panth. But also physically, staying fit. We are very good when it comes to buying fast food, and we have all these fast food restaurants that are given Sikh names or Punjabi names. And the sad state of affairs is that a lot of us, including the Singhs mainly, and I can talk from my own circles and my own growing up in Sikh circles and coming to Sikhi, is that mental fitness and physical fitness is something that isn't spoke about as was in those times. At the times of Bhai Fauja Singh, we would see things like the Khalsa farm, where Singhs would get together, do camps, do shooting, do air rifling, do bows and arrows, do archery, and also make sure they're physically fit. For when these times come, physical fitness will be paramount. So using this time to do home workouts, going for jogs, as Guru Angad Dev Ji Maharaj themselves started Mallakara, which was a wrestling facility, most definitely get involved in some form of martial arts and start training yourself up in that sense as well. So from the bakshish of Guru Sahib, when these deep and these horrible times have come, even in the depths of these darknesses, we've realized that we have found light many times, as the history I've mentioned earlier. So now my question to the Sad Sangat and also to myself really is that we've heard all of this history from the 1st to the 10th of June. Now there are two options after leaving this live stream and after even the week of June 1984. We can either go back to our normal lives, having nodded our heads at the history and also respecting it and also resonating with it to a certain extent. Or we can take this experience, the experience of those that were there and the lessons learned, to actually let it inform our lives and start planning for the future. So that question is left with you in terms of, will you leave this June, this week and this Sikya in the week of June 1984, or will you take it forward with you in the rest of your lives? And a quote I'd like to bring you all to is something that a great Guru Sikh said to me in Canada once, was that many people are committed to Sikhi emotionally, but there are very few that are committed mentally. It's very easy to ramp up, and when these sparks of inspiration come, to plan to take over the world. And rightly so. That's the point of this inspiration. That's the point of all of these Sakhiya, and we should draw inspiration from them. But generally that fizz goes up and comes crashing back down, whether it's a week or a month later. Now the truth and the hardest part is mentally trying to commit to these things, and also commit to seva of the panth, or development of yourself and your own Sikhi mentally. And that comes with a plan, that comes with consistency, and that comes by taking help from other people. So find Guru Sikhs that are local to you, and most importantly, find the help of Guru Sahib and start with that ardas. Now, it's not to say we're all going to turn perfect overnight. Guru Sahib acknowledges that by saying, Pullan andar sabko, apal Guru kartar. But everyone is bound to making a mistake. The only person that cannot make a mistake is Guru and Waheguru. So it's important to not enter your path in Sikhi or the next stages in your Sikhi life to thinking, I'm only going to do it if it's perfect, because it never will be. And that's not the point. And Guru Sahib acknowledges that. So this is now your chance to be a part of the revolution that Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj started themselves. And by all means, if we don't take that part, whether that's getting involved in a local seva initiative at your Gurdwara, whether it's learning about Sikh history, whether it's starting a Mool Mantra Jap, whether it's starting to read Gurbani, anything, whatever your step is, just make it and take it forward. This is our part to be a part of that revolution. And the revolution of Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj is something that makes governments, make oppressors tremble at their very core. And one thing I saw earlier actually was an interview, and it outlines and it also reflects how scared people are of Sikhi, which is why we've been persecuted and which is why we are under constant threat. And the interview I'm mentioning is that of Cynthia Kepley Mahmood, who was an American, a Western journalist, a Western researcher, whose book I mentioned earlier, Fighting for Faith and Nation, Dialogues with Sikh Militants. And while she was in Punjab at the time, she describes her events and how she was constantly harassed by the police of Punjab and at one point gang raped by 6 policemen. Now, Saad Sangatji, if a Western academic can be persecuted like this due to the fact that she's reporting on this struggle, the truth of this struggle, and also the truth of the Guru Sikhs behind this struggle, then that truly shows you and truly reflects to us how scared people are of our narrative coming out in its entirety. Now, also, massive respect, and also we thank Cynthia Kepley Mahmood, because in that interview, she also goes on to describe that that did not let her get her down. Her legs were broken. She was stabbed many times across different places in her body. But also, being from a non-Sikh point of view, being a non-Sikh herself, that gave her more inspiration to find out what was truly going on and resultantly produce this book. So I implore you all, if you haven't read that book, due to the sacrifice she's given for it, it is a truly amazing book. Please do get it and read it at some point. This seva doesn't come to everyone. There are, if you think about one parallel I always draw is how many people there are in the world, 7+ billion. Out of that 7 billion, the Sikh Panth is the only group of people that has a Puran Guru, a true Guru, that has come with 100% of such, 100% of the truth. And a way we always describe to kids in terms of relating it to other leaders of other religions is that Waheguru, God themselves, thought that I'm now going down myself to do the job, because the job hasn't been done in its entirety in the past by sending other people, by sending other leaders. So we're the only faith, we're lucky enough to be born into the houses of Sikhs in which we have a true Guru in every aspect. Now, there are around 30 million Sikhs in the world. There's probably a small percentage of those Sikhs that actually engage in Sikhi and maybe have a good foundation of Sikhi. And there's probably an even smaller percentage of those people that actually engage and interact and are trying to better themselves in their Sikh faith. And if you're watching this live stream, you're probably one of that tiny percentage, which in the whole sphere of things is not many people at all. Now, when I think about this, it makes me count my blessings that Guru Sahib, for whatever reason, has brought us to learn about Sikhi, but also given us the platform and given us now the chance to progress ourselves as well. Now, how much we want to make of that is up to us. How much we want to cash that in is truly up to us. The resources are available on basis of Sikhi, from Seek to Inspire, from Khalsa Camp, from Akal Publishers, from the NSYF. All these things are at our fingertips. So it's important to make sure we make the most of this, because it doesn't come to everyone. And Guru Sahib, within Guru Granth Sahib, he said that Jis mastak bhag su laga sir, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੱਥੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਭਾਗ ਲੱਗੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ. Those people that have great fortune on their foreheads, just as these Shaheed Singh Singhania, just as the Guru Sikhs of past and present, only those people get to do seva in this month of Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. And if you're watching this, most definitely you are one of those fortunate few. So do not take this lightly and do not waste this opportunity, in particular in lockdown that we have. So just finishing off, when connecting with your history, it's very easy to get wound up in the numbers, as I do quite often, and also the stats and figures. But don't just learn these things theoretically, make it an experience. One thing that always helps me to connect with the times I'm reading of are either eyewitness accounts or interviews with people that were currently there. And one thing I'd implore you all to watch, and we will share a link to this, is a documentary on the family members of people that had been killed in 1984, called Hunting Sikhs. So it's available on YouTube. It's an 8-minute documentary called Hunting Sikhs. And I can't emphasize enough how important that documentary is. We come from this lineage of Shaheeds that have put everything on the line for Sikhi. And due to that, their sacrifices, we're here today. So let's also give our part and also accept the blessing that Guru Sahib has bestowed upon us. And I'll finish with an African proverb that resonates very well with me, that says that until the lions learn to write, the story will always glorify the hunter. And currently, Sadh Singh, the hunters are writing our stories, and we haven't quite learned yet how to write. We've started, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So us being that lion, those lions and those calls, those princesses that start delving into our history, connecting to it, so that we can control our own narrative, and rightly so. So quite a few of the Sangat have been asking about the book list on our YouTube channel. On the third or fourth day, I can't remember, in the comments, I wrote down the full book list of everything I've mentioned so far. We'll also post it on our Instagram and Facebook. So if anyone is interested in their own reading, and I highly recommend you do, you can access those books and buy those books from wherever they need be. So I'd just like to thank the Sangat for their support and also the feedback. If there is any feedback, whether it's good or bad, please do let us know so that we can continue these experiences in the future. This is the last of the Remembering June 1984 series, and tomorrow myself and Bhai Mandeep Singh from East London will be doing a Q&A looking at the current injustices taking place across the Western world, in particular with the innocent killing of George Floyd, and also what that means for us as Sikh and how we can draw parallels to it, and why more so we should be empathizing and also fighting for these needs, having gone through different injustices ourselves. So that will be at 6 o'clock tomorrow on the Instagram Live. And we'll finish with what we always do, that the Khalsa has been started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji Maharaj. Let's take our spot, and Guru Sahibs themselves will put us wherever we best fit into this panth. And no one can ever dare to try and destroy the foundations of this panth, because they've been started by Guru Nanak Dev Ji themselves. Jinko Sadguru Thapya, in mate na sake koi. Waheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji ki Fateh.